All right. Well, welcome. This webinar is made possible by a partnership between Lake County Child Welfare Services and Chabot Las Positas Community College District. And we are so grateful for them here at First Five Lake for their funding, for their partnership, and for the unique way that they're investing in our community by providing these trainings through Title IV-E. This training is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube for later viewing on the First Five Lake County YouTube page. As you are joining us, please keep your microphone on mute unless you are trying to ask a question. You're also welcome to use the chat feature. I'm going to be monitoring that, and I'm going to be putting some things in the chat as well, so keep your eye on that throughout the webinar. I want to introduce to you now our speaker, our trainer for today, who you're all here to see. Allison Davis Maxson is a nationally recognized expert in the fields of child welfare and children's mental health, specializing in attachment, developmental trauma, and permanency and adoption. She's the executive director of the National Center on Adoption and Permanency, and she was the foster care consultant for the Paramount Pictures movie Instant Family. Anybody see Instant Family? It's excellent. It'll make you cry, but it is excellent. Allison was honored in 2017 with the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute Angels in Adoption Award, and is the co-author of 7 core issues in adoption and permanency. For more than 25 years, she has dedicated her clinical work as a licensed marriage and family therapist to expert programs and practices in children's mental health, attachment, family systems, adoption, permanency, and developmental trauma. She provides training and program and curriculum development, public speaking, and consultation services on a wide range of topics. And she frequently presents at national, state, and local mental health and child welfare conferences. We are so honored to have her. In 2020, Allison co-founded a nonprofit organization with writer-director Sean Anders. It's called Foster Strong. And if you haven't checked out their website or listened to the podcast, you absolutely have to. Foster Strong is led by a former foster youth whose mission is to empower current and former foster youth to reclaim their story and to rebrand foster care to include their narratives, voices, and perspectives. And the podcast is outstanding. You can find it on Spotify at I believe it's the letter U, the letter R, and Foster Strong. And I'll put that in the chat later. But we are so grateful to Allison for co-founding that in a year of COVID. There are good things that are still coming out during this difficult season. So thank you so much for joining us, Allison. We are blessed and honored to have you. Take it away.
Oh my gosh, Carly, you're going to make me cry. Like the last part was really the best part. I love that you did a shout out for Foster Strong and our mission and what we're trying to accomplish. And first of all, thank you, Carla. Thank you for First Five. I've been a fan of First Five forever. And this is a first for me to actually come into First Five and speak to one of the things I'm most passionate about, attachment and developmental trauma. Thank each and every one of you. I don't know which kind of part of the elephant you're holding, whether you're a social worker, a therapist, a foster parent, a kin parent, a paraprofessional, whatever your role is with children and families. Bless you. Thank you. We need you and welcome. You're my favorite peeps in the whole world. So thank you. I am thrilled that you're here. So I'm going to take a second, pull up my PowerPoint. Bear with me because you never know, there's gremlins in the system. Yes, looks like it may work. Everybody see that? I hope. Yes, I'm seeing nods. Thank you, Jeff. Nods help me. I appreciate it. Wonderful. So I'm going to start a little bit and just tell you a little bit more about me and kind of how I work. Most of you have probably never seen me or heard from me because I've never done anything with First Five. I always over prepare. It's the first thing you should know. So I way over prepare. I have a gazillion PowerPoints. I have articles, handouts. Most likely I'll be putting more in there because I geek out on all the resources, as I'm hoping you guys do. I love resources. I love handouts. I love tools. I love all of it. So I'll be weaving a lot of that through today's presentation. You did hopefully get access to a Google Drive that's got some of the handouts, and I'll be kind of linking those to what I'll be moving you through today. And then we meet again in a month, and I'll be doing a lot more kind of practical tools to get to some of the implementation and the strategies that we're talking about here. So again, big thank you to First Five and Lake County. And just to let you guys know who's in the room, you have 7 different counties. So you guys are from all over. You hold all these different roles. My hope is that you really engage in this, this webinar, engage in the chat room, make comments, share your story. I'm going to be putting some resources that I think Carla's going to be adding to the chat room, because as you'll see, as I'm moving through different parts, I may say, this is a great link for this, or this is a great website or book for this. So I'll be weaving that, because again, I'm a resource junkie, and I assume that lots of you guys are too. A little bit, and Carla kind of spoke to my specialization around kind of 3 areas, what I call the 3-legged stool. And in your mind, what I'd have you already think about is a 3-legged stool. Those 3 parts are always connected, that we can't disentangle one from the other. If you take one of the legs away, the stool falls over. So I really am going to be linking attachment to development to trauma, and linking those in a way where we really start to kind of see the impact of attachment disruptions, of trauma, especially as it relates to intergenerational patterns of trauma that are passed through familial systems. And then a lot of focus on tools to help us change these patterns, because they are malleable, but we can't heal what we cannot acknowledge. So we'll be talking a lot about some even difficult subjects and topics. And one of the things that, you know, I just always like to begin a talk like this with is, you'll find me being really specific around words and language. And especially with what's going on in the context of our culture right now, that I think we have to, especially as helpers, when we get in front of the quote, the new person that we're trying to help, the child, the family, the whoever that new person is, we don't know their life experience, their culture, their belief systems, for us, quote, helpers to open ourselves up to this learning process. You know, I consider myself a lifelong learner. It's actually one of the things that was exciting about developing this training for you all. I get to learn again. It's one of the things I'm just passionate about. I really do love to learn. So as we kind of enter this space of really talking about especially things like trauma and child trauma and abuse and attachment disruptions and intergenerational trauma, that our hope is that we bring insight and then healing to this process, not just for children, but for adults. Because unresolved trauma that we grow up and becomes implicitly encoded impacts not just our well-being, but our relationships with other and subsequently our children. So healing these patterns for adults is, for me, it's a number 1 priority that we ought to have, kind of embracing our adults that had early adversity and trauma. And it's never too late to heal. It's one of the things you'll hear me weaving through. So it's always why we want to not just be hearing what I'm going to be speaking to about children, but that what happens in childhood doesn't stay in childhood. It builds a brain and it builds a belief system. So bringing these things into awareness and knowing that at any age, healing is always possible. So without further ado, our objectives today, I'm not going to spend too much time. I have about 40 slides we're going to get to. You're going to see me moving relatively quickly, but I'm going to be working to kind of scaffold knowledge this way. So we're going to be speaking about attachment, both what I call the art and the science of attachment. So you'll hear me weaving a lot around neurobiology and what we've gleaned from from research. One of the things that I think is a challenge for most of us, including professionals, social workers, therapists in child welfare, is how much of what we learn from research or from science, specifically child development and brain science, doesn't often get to the folks that need it the most, the folks on the front lines, our foster parents, our resource parents, our kin parents, that it doesn't get to folks in the ways that they need it. So it's not just reading an article on the brain science, it's give me the tool that I need right now when I have a dysregulated child that won't allow me to soothe and comfort that child. And that's all brain-based stuff. So my hope is that one of the things I'm able to do is break some of this down in really tangible ways so we can take what we're gleaning from science and put it into the hands of our parents and our caregivers that really need it the most. So it's one of the things I'm most passionate about. This thing called developmental trauma, we're going to be speaking quite a bit to that, attachment and patterns and what happens when attachment gets disrupted and the impact on all areas of that child's development. The next time we meet in a month, I'm going to be doing much more around the skill building to address the adversity that children and adults experience. So again, it's why we're doing a part 1 and a part 2. Carla mentioned this. One of the things I spent with my co-author doing for 2 years is research and writing, integrating attachment and trauma and the 7 core issues in adoption and permanency, which are lifelong issues and challenges for what we call members of the constellation, which include the child who's in foster care or kin care or that is adopted, even at birth. These are lifelong issues. The grief, the loss that hit identity formation, the closed adoptions, the withholding of information. There are so many things that really create lifelong losses and complexities for children and our parents, our birth first parents as well. So in our book, we actually do a deep dive on the whole constellation. By the way, it's 450 pages. So when I said Allison over prepares, that's kind of a theme. I don't know that I do anything really easily, but we spent an awful lot of time really kind of scaffolding the information and the knowledge so it's really digestible. And at the end of each chapter, and I say this especially for those of you that are professionals in the field, at the end of each chapter, we do a tips and tools for professionals to address the core issues. Because if you are not a lived member of the constellation, if you're not adopted, if you're not a foster parent, if you're not an adoptive parent or a birth first parent, you don't have that lived experience. So we have an outside in perspective. So we really worked hard to pull the voices of folks with lived experience. And then again, at the end, the tips and tools to help us address address the complexities while assisting us in understanding those folks outside in. What are those complex challenges that are lifelong and then intergenerational? Typically, the outside culture views adoption and permanency like it's a moment in time. Like, oh, the child's a child. They're not seeing that child when they're 15 and 20 and 25 and 30 and 40, and that the foundation of our belief system is formed in childhood. All of this brain-based stuff, which we're going to be talking about, the foundation of the self is really formed in childhood. So we're building a brain and a belief system. It's why these critical years are really important for us to talk about. So one of the things I love to start with, are you guys ready to jump into some content? Yes. So if you guys could lean in, those of you that have your camera on, I want to see you kind of doing this with me. This is one of the things I love to do. I always start a kind of a discussion on attachment with the difference between love and attachment. Because one of the things, in fact, we did it in our movie, Instant Family, that we have to kind of bust this myth that love is the same as attachment. Like, oh, we'll just love on those kids and everything will be fine. No, Like, not that love isn't wonderful, like we love love. So I want to really speak to the difference between love and attachment. And by the way, at the end of this, you'll be going, oh, we got the difference between love and attachment. So I want you all to hold up your hands with me and hold up your hands like this. And I want you to kind of go, see this space in here? This is love. This is where love lives. Go, oh, we love love. Look at love, like all this space, that's love. Now I want you to slowly, 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 as far as your hands will go, like far, far, hit the person next to you, although you're alone right now. Normally, if we were together, you'd be hitting the person next to you. And I want you to look at this space. This is attachment. This is attachment. Pull it back to love. We love love. Love is very nice. Love, love. Attachment here. Love. In fact, love, this will grow out of the experience of attachment. We have to learn love, how to give love, how to receive this wonderful thing called love. But attachment is so, so much more than love. So we're going to kind of start with this big differentiation, because we often hear this just from kind of folks from the outside in going, oh, just love them up and give them love. And I'm going to break all of that down so we get this really significant difference between attachment and love. And what I want us to kind of be thinking about here, as we're thinking about this difference between love and attachment, is that when a baby comes into the world, there is no attachment pattern. They don't know the dance of attachment. They don't know how to get their needs met. They have to learn this dance of attachment, which means, how do I get my needs met through human connectedness? I actually have to learn how to get my needs met by having other humans come to me and meet my needs. And these are complex attachment and developmental needs. But the baby that comes into the world doesn't know this dance. They're going to be learning this dance through us, through attachment. And that a child, and this is where I'm going to link attachment. Remember I said the three-legged stool, attachment to child development, which we're going to spend a lot of time on. That the primary modality through which a child's developmental potential, and I want us to think about developmental potential, from their physiological development, their social, their cognitive, their emotional development, their conscience development, every aspect of development gets maximized through attachment, or it can get minimized via the lack of attachment or attachment disruptions. So attachment's not just kind of a nice thing to have around, it's imperative, as it helps a child, and really any of us, maximize our attachment potential. Now, I'm going to be breaking that down in a little bit, but I already want us to kind of feel like, oh, that sounds really significant and heavy, and yes. Because attachment disruptions, when children lose their primary attachment caregivers, how would you then guess that it impacts development? Their developmental potential freezes. They're in crisis, they're in survival, they're frozen, they're stuck, they're reactive, because they now need to redo attachment to a new caregiver, which they typically protest against initially, because you're a stranger. So the more attachment disruptions we give to children, the more we're impacting every aspect of their development. And I'm going to be building a case around this. And even if I sound like at times, you guys, like a Debbie Downer, we're going to get to the good stuff. But I have to kind of lay out the case of why this is so impactful to children. And we have to be minimizing moves in attachment and disruptions in attachment, and then maximizing when children land in permanency, how we help that parent, resource parent, kin parent, whoever that parent is, maximize and catch children up developmentally. Because much of the time what happens is now children have what we call developmental deficits. Because we weren't maximizing development through attachment, children were surviving. And when children are surviving, I want you to have this image in your head when they're not deeply, securely attached. They're in impermanence, like in foster care, moving, impermanence. It's like you throw that child into the deep end of the swimming pool and they don't know how to swim. So they're like this. Am I doing that good enough for you guys? You kind of get that image? If you throw me into the deep end of the pool, I'm barely breathing. I'm drowning. I'm scared. I'm in crisis. And even if you come in to help me, do I know you're wanting to help me? I might scratch your eyes out or bite you. Or remember, I'm drowning. I'm fear-based. I'm in survival right now. So when we kind of disrupt attachment repeatedly for children and they're not learning the dance of attachment, they develop what we call attachment deflecting behaviors, fear-based behaviors, shame-based behaviors. And again, I always bring these pieces up because we can't heal what we can't acknowledge. So we have to be able to get to the root of what's really happening with our most impacted kids around attachment. So one of the areas I love to talk with, and if we had a bit more time, if I'm doing an all-day training on attachment, I actually spend quite a bit of time on this piece, which is really about your attachment style and pattern. Because one of the things that's too common when we do classes on attachment or we talk about attachment, we think we're talking about a child. But children, remember I said the child comes in and they don't have a pattern. They don't have a style of attaching. Children develop the pattern and style of their parents. This is why attachment becomes so important. So I always begin trainings and webinars like this on our attachment patterns. So when you think about what is your attachment style, this is just one of my favorite little memes that's out there, because tell me about your attachments, your JPEGs and your PDFs. That we want to be thinking about our attachment style and dance, because every one of us has one, or you wouldn't be alive on the planet. And this is, and I want to especially talk to folks right now in the field that do trainings for foster parents, adoptive parents, kin parents. When we have new parents coming in, especially if we're walking them through our home study processes and our trainings and et cetera, think about that process. When I'm sitting in a classroom hearing information, it is left hemispheric, meaning it's all theoretical. And I'm going, oh, that sounds great. I'll do that. I'll do that. I'll do that. I would never hit a kid. I'm a great parent, blah, blah, blah. Or I think I'll be a great parent. I'm just going down this checklist. It's all left hemispheric. The difference when a child, a real living, breathing child swimming in the deep end of the pool from trauma, lands on my attachment dance floor as the parent, game changer. What gets activated is my right hemisphere as the parent, is basically my attachment style. As all these demands from the child, they might be screaming or yelling or biting me or telling me to go to hell or I'm not their real mom or whatever they're doing, I'm no longer sitting in a class left hemispheric taking in theoretical information. It is now all emotionally based. And what's lighting up is right hemispheric to right hemispheric, what we call the limbic dance. So when we're doing our trainings and preparatory work with parents, we really need to start with their attachment style and patterns. And it isn't just kind of talking about it again, left hemispheric, it's making sure, in fact, one of the curriculums that I assisted in developing, it's called Pathways to Permanency, is really all about kind of helping us be more in awareness of our attachment patterns and styles, including especially our emotional triggers, because we all have them. We are not human if we don't have them. So I have triggers and a style and an attachment pattern, which doesn't get activated until a child lands on my dance floor. And what if we're giving you 3 children at the same time, all of them swimming in the deep end of the pool? Which is why we really kind of talk about this 3-legged stool, not just for children, but for us. That every single interpersonal skill, attachment skill I have as a parent, I had to learn. And much of that learning was implicitly encoded, not left hemispheric, theoretical. All of us can kind of read a checklist and go, oh, that sounds great. Doing those things with the child via parent-child attachment, which is a dance, is a very different thing. It's actually why making sure our parents and families have the right kinds of support services, have access to what they need when they need it. And I'll give you an example about that. So as a therapist, I'm a big believer, because I specialize in attachment, family systems, and trauma, that for our kids and our families, therapy just for the sake of therapy is like, am I allowed to say dog do? Like dog do? If it's the wrong kind of, quote, therapy. Because if we're not, if the client isn't the attachment relationship, then I'm not quite sure what we're doing. That my client is the attachment relationship between the child and the family. Because if I take a child into my office, I'm not, and leave the parents out on the couch in the waiting room, first of all, I'm not really helping those parents deepen and strengthen their primary attachment relationship to the child. I could be strengthening that child's attachment or connection to me, the therapist, and I'm not quite sure why I would want to do that. So everything I do is from a family systems attachment orientation, because again, my client, I can't heal that child by seeing that child an hour a week. That is impossible. The healing mechanism for a child with relational trauma, complex trauma, is the attachment relationship. So the client, and by the way, train clinicians around attachment family systems, because if we're not in awareness, the therapy we could be providing could be undermining the very thing the child needs the most and the parent needs the most, which is the right kind of support to understand the complexities of the child that they're parenting that has developmental trauma. So it's why this is really imperative for us, in particular as the helping professional, to really think about, do we have the right kinds of supports for our children and families? Are our families really getting what they need when they need it? Again, going back to the preparatory training that we might be doing for families, that's all kind of wonderful, but how much the parent really retains when that child lands on their dance floor, because that's often when they need assistance the most, because we're triggered in a different way. So kind of accessing our wisdom and decoding some of what we may or may not have learned in those classes, or what we know would be therapeutic, is really what's helpful. That's why, again, the right kind of therapy, family systems, attachment-oriented, trauma-informed, really critically important. Otherwise, our parents can feel, well, I guess everything I'm doing is not working, and the therapist isn't helping me very much anyway, and how long can any of us feel like a failure with our families? If every day I wake up going, I don't think I'm helping this kid, and I don't really know how to help this kid. I've worked with and through many disruptions for families that many of them, I think, are more on us and the system. Have empathy for so many of our families that really struggle with our kids of high trauma. So I want to go back to and lay a little bit more foundation around kind of what I call the art of attachment. And again, I'm going to move relatively quickly, but just know I geek out on all of this stuff. And those of you that want kind of to learn more or any of that, you can always email me. Happy to send you resources that might be helpful. And by the way, I got none of this in graduate school. This has all been kind of my own geeking out, learning around all of it. The father of attachment, we bow to Sir John Bowlby, who's no longer here on the planet, but I just want to contextualize kind of where this theory came from, and really kind of the brilliance of John Bowlby. At the time when Sir John Bowlby was kind of working with, and he was a young psychoanalyst in his mid-20s and late 20s, they put him working with a high offender population. By the way, our offenders, our prison population, is on the highest rates of early developmental trauma. In fact, I think they are the highest rate of developmental trauma that are really anywhere. They put John Bowlby working with this group of offenders. And one of the things he did, and again, this is in the 40s, he did a psychosocial assessment. He basically looked into their background. He looked into their childhood. At a time, by the way, science wasn't doing this. We had this notion that children were like tabula rasas, like it didn't really matter what happened to children. we weren't really focusing on mothers and babies and brain development. We didn't have the knowledge base that we had now. So children were better seen and not heard. We had some, by the way, some of those myths are alive and well, unfortunately. But one of the things Bowlby did in this psychosocial assessment with this group of offenders in prison was he discovered that the majority of them, basically, and he didn't use the word attachment, but he said they didn't have mothers. They didn't have mothers. They either were living on the streets, they were raised in orphanages at the time, or they just moved from home to home or with a relative, or basically what he thought or what he discovered was, well, they didn't have mothers, but really what were mothers, what would a mother be doing with a child that would later turn into a conscience? Some of what he was really moving into was then he started doing observations with mothers and babies, like what is really happening between that mother and that baby. And remember, again, this is at a time where we weren't like, babies don't remember anything, so it's not really important what happens to babies. Can you believe we used to think that? We used to think that. So it's not important what happens to babies. And Sir John Bowlby went about on his whole life's mission to change that. In fact, one of the things he discovered was that the little one, the infant, comes into the world with what he called an attachment behavioral system. It's like a seed that we're wired to attach. We don't know how, but we're wired to attach. So what the baby does when they go into a need state is they just go into distress, and that this attachment behavioral system is waiting for a response, from a caregiver or a parent. It's one of the reasons why, by the way, that adoption can work so beautifully, because it really doesn't matter what that caregiver or parent looks like or smells like or how old they are or what color they are or that they look like the baby. Those things don't matter. What matters with the attachment behavioral system is that somebody shows up. Somebody has to show up and claim the needs of that little one, that biological being, that little baby has biologically based need states, and that someone has to show up and claim the needs and start meeting the needs. And that baby will get attached to the person that keeps showing up to meet the needs. It's kind of the beauty of attachment. So one of the things that Bowlby did, he didn't just study humans. In fact, he was an ethologist. He was a scientist. He studied animal behavior. He studied mammals. He studied birds. And what do you think is the difference between, just generally, the difference between reptiles and mammals, which you see here? This thing called attachment, that mammals attach. Some of the most beautiful, have you ever seen elephants, mother elephants? That when a threat comes, when the lion comes, what do the mothers of the clan do? They circle the babies. Attachment is not just us, it's really about high functioning mammals. And basically we attach in order to survive. You have a handout, by the way, so you don't have to kind of be copying these. You have a handout called The Purpose of Attachment. But one of the things that Bowlby stumbled on is he's looking at, like, well, why are we attaching? Why is attaching important? Because basically when that little one gets attached, when he seeks proximity to his primary caregiver, it's more likely that he grows into adulthood and passes down his genetics to the next generation. That it really is about survival of the species. Now in humans, attachment has many secondary purposes. And as you could imagine, these secondary purposes are really critically important. So let's look at these. Is the IQ important? Well, attachment helps to maximize the IQ, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The development of the child's socialization skills, how the child learns this dance of connection. Many of you in the field have heard of this notion of what we call serve and return, that when the child does this, what the child's waiting for is for the caregiver to do that. So when the child points at the bird and the parent goes, oh, look, a bird. Or when the child cries, that we come and hold the child. That when the child does this, the parent does this. This serve and return, basically teaching the child the dance of attachment, the dance of connection. The facilitation of identity formation. Wow, important. Becoming who we are, figuring out who we are. Think about the complexities of identity, of self, figuring out who we are based on culture and race and ethnicity, vertical belief systems and values we get from our parents and our extended family system. Identity formation, the foundation of this is attachment. It's actually one of the reasons why our children that get stuck in long-term foster care, in residential treatment centers, in group homes, imagine what they struggle with often the most. Generally kind of two areas. One, identity formation. I don't know who I am. I have no roots. I don't know where I come from. I don't know who I am. You took my lineage, my heritage, my culture, my ethnicity, my language. You took that from me. So now I don't know who I am. I'm not rooted anywhere. We hear it's actually why our Foster Strong becomes so important, because we have whole generations of youth that child welfare has raised or that are stuck in our long-term residential treatment centers that struggle around this. I'm not rooted, I belong nowhere. Our most important and primary need is our need to belong, our need to attach, to feel connected. It's actually how we feel a sense of value. That second piece that becomes really important is this next one that I pulled in, which is what we call affect regulation or affect modulation. I have to learn to regulate from the inside out. How do I learn this? Through attachment. Imagine that. And we're going to break that down and talk more about that. The development of a conscience, which is one of the things that Bowlby also stumbled on. That the development of a conscience, it's actually why humans have such a kind of an extended childhood. The development of our conscience develops slowly over time. So think when I'm 1 and when I'm 2 and when I'm 3 and when I'm 4, that our conscience develops slowly over time. But the foundation of that, like that bottom layer of that cake, if you will, is empathy. Well, I have to learn empathy. Somebody has to teach me empathy. I have to experience this thing called empathy from the outside in, meaning my caregivers have to come towards my pain and distress and dysregulation. I'm drowning in the pool, and bring me empathy, soothe me, comfort me, calm me, help me feel deeply connected. Otherwise, you leave me in high states of dysregulation, drowning in the pool. I feel no empathy. And if I stay in that deep end of the pool my whole life, my whole childhood, I think I will grow up and not care very much about your distress. You might see me be very provocative, be very oppositional, be really hurtful. I don't care about you. I can be very, you will see bullying behavior. Right? And it's not because I was born a bully. And we're actually going to talk about the patterns and what happens when primary attachment needs aren't met for children. The good thing is, because they're still children, those little brains are still malleable. So we're going to weave in some brain development there as well. And the last one, which again, equally as important, the ability to attend. Actually have to learn to hold my attention span, to do deep loving gaze into another human set of eyes, which later turns into, oh, I can focus on my teacher and watch my teacher and attend to her and read her social emotional cues and needs. All of this foundation learned through attachment, especially in the earliest of years. So it's why holding our babies and gazing into their eyes and moving them into calmness and relaxation helps them to learn. Helps them to learn in school. We're actually going to break this down a little bit more. So attachment and brain development. The brain is one of my favorite things to talk about. I really don't go anywhere and talk about attachment without including the brain. For that little one, I want you to think about that kind of human brain coming into the world, ready to basically learn. This is actually an interesting, if we think about it kind of like this, that the human brain can come anywhere into the world, whether I'm in China or South America or here or Russia, any culture, learn any language, absorb, adapt, and survive. That our brain is basically pre-programmed to adapt and be malleable right at birth. So that's the great strength of the human brain. But I want you to also flip that over. It's what makes that human brain extremely sensitive to adversity, to toxicity, to violence, to stress, to attachment disruptions. If we move that baby 8 times during the first year of life, disrupting attachment, we now have a high stress brain, that we have a brain that's absorbed a lot of toxicity. And that whole first year, that brain was learning, that brain was adapting, creating neuronal pathways so that that brain now is going to reflect the setting that we gave to it. So I want you to think that this malleable part of our brain is amazing and wonderful, but it's what makes those first few years in particular so critically important. So that the experience dependent brain, that little brain that comes into the world, needs attachment to, quote, kind of build itself, to create all the neuronal pathways that are going to help it to be successful and to thrive. It's actually why attachment is so important. We say attachment isn't just this nice thing to have around, actually helps us to build a brain. So caretakers do more than just kind of feed the baby and hold the baby, and we're actually activating the growth of the brain, especially right hemispheric growth. And we're going to talk a bit more about what we mean by right hemispheric growth. Right hemispheric growth is really limbic growth. It's basically the emotional brain. It's like building the emotional freeway of the child. It's why year 1, year 2, and year 3, you're building the emotional freeway. Can the child find homeostasis, find calmness? Can they regulate? Can they bounce back from adversity? All of this, critically important the first few years. When those needs aren't met and we expose children to a lot of toxicity, guess what doesn't get built? The ability to self-regulate and bounce back from distress. So we can have children that live in high states of distress chronically. They wake up in distress, they go to bed in distress. In fact, they may not go to bed, they may not be sleeping at night, they may be hoarding and walking around at night, all because they're in chronic states of hyper-arousal. The tendency is, and it's actually, I'll speak to this for a second because it's my own frustration with my own field that I'm in, is there's a tendency to chronically talk about behaviors. And you'll rarely hear Allison talking about behaviors because it drives me bananas. Every single one of those behaviors come from, guess where? Actually comes from the brain. So I want us to think really differently, like children are not kind of doing these behaviors on purpose. These are defensive strategies that come from how this brain was built and responding and surviving in its environment. So all of our strategies and tools are going to be kind of all brain-based, bottom-up tools. So we can go back and do what we call developmental reparenting, because if that child then had 3 years of adversity, maybe bouncing from home to home, or 3 years of trauma, you have minus 3 years of development. So you may have a 3-year-old that acts more like a 1-year-old in terms of their ability to regulate and self-soothe. So punishing that child or doing timeouts with that child will get you nowhere, because that child doesn't have those skills in their little brain and physiological system. There are things we can do to catch that little one up quickly. So we're always going to be focused on what we're adding experientially to teach and train that brain, right? As opposed to just reacting to behaviors. So we're going to connect all of this. You guys with me? Hopefully I'm not scaring anyone. So I do want to talk about this for a sec, because one of the things that I think happens in our field, especially in child welfare in particular, is that we tend to butcher this word called attachment, where we go, oh, well, he's attached to his brother, or he's attached to his neighbor, he's attached. Like we just kind of use this word like, oh, he's just attached. So I want us to be more selective about this word. And so I'm going to give you this way to kind of think about the attachment pyramid and your child, hopefully the child that you're parenting or you're working with. Because many of our children in child welfare never get what they need most to heal. What they need most to heal is permanency in their primary attachment relationship. I want to say that again, permanency in their primary attachment relationship. So let me show you what that looks like. The top of the pyramid, primary parent-child attachment. Normally it's 1, 2, maybe 3 people total if you're lucky in your whole life. More traditionally, it's mom and dad, mom and mom, pop and pop. It can be grandma. It can be 1, 2, basically, generally very top of the pyramid. And those are the people, those parents are claiming my needs. And I'm going to speak a little bit more specifically to that in a little bit. Claiming my attachment and developmental needs. So when I have a need, they keep showing up in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning, like they keep showing up until we get into what we call a secure attachment relationship. These attachment relationships are not interchangeable. So for instance, if I'm securely attached to a child for the first 3 years of that child's life, and you're going to move that child to another home, that child does not take that attachment relationship with them. They're going to be grieving the loss of me, the person they were attached to for 3 years. My face, my smell, my memories with him, the way I held him and talked him and rocked him to sleep, like that child's attached to me. We now, when we're moving this child, add grief, loss, and suffering and pain because that child's missing me. These attachment relationships are not interchangeable. It again is the beauty in attachment, but sometimes in child welfare, we think about it a bit differently and wrongly around, well, he was acting all this way in this home, so we'll move him over here and it'll all be the same. That's not how attachment works, and it's not how little brains and bodies who are attached grieve those losses and then have to reattach while they're suffering. They have so much pain, our little ones do. Grief, loss, pain, suffering. In fact, they can start learning, why would I attach? Why would I want to attach? You're just going to move me again. They can start being oppositional and defy attachment, deflecting attachment. I'm not stupid. I may be 6 years old, but I've been learning this whole time. If every time I started getting attached, you took that person from me, I will start defending against attachment. And then the child's in trouble. And then we're in trouble with that child. Not that we can't change that pattern, but we have to be much more sophisticated about how we're intervening with this child that now has developmental relational trauma, attachment-based trauma. I'm going to finish the pyramid, guys. So down below, we have secondary attachment relationships. This would be like if you had the most wonderful grandma on the whole planet, right? This child will always prefer mommy or daddy, but oh, I love my grandma, right? Or an auntie, right? These are my godparents. So these are a good second, but they're not primary. The primary is the primary attachment relationship is the one claiming my needs. So in the middle of the night, if I wake up in a nightmare and I'm screaming bloody murder, this is the one that's showing up, and I will allow you to comfort and soothe, to come close to me, to move me back into homeostasis. I allow you to co-regulate me. Does that make sense? I wish you guys were here in person because I just can't see you. And I always love that feedback. On the bottom of the pyramid are just friendly strangers, just kind of folks that if I have basic trust, if I'm securely attached, that I view humans as good and kind and loving. I may not if I don't have a secure attachment relationship. But the piece that I really want you to see when we talk about attachments, that there is a primary attachment relationship, and I can't get to that primary attachment and create a secure relationship without permanency. If I'm always in foster care, I'm waiting for you to leave me, waiting for the rug to be pulled out from under me. It's actually why in the world of attachment, you got to put a ring on it. I like that. That was hideous. I just did that little Beyonce dance, like put a ring on it. You have to commit. You got to claim. Children need to be claimed, or else they'll always be in secondary. And it's not a full committed, again, attachment is this. Remember, a full claiming, it's not this. I want to pull in a little bit more, what I call the neurobiology of attachment. We go into a bit more of the science of attachment. That one of the things that we've gleaned, especially when we talk about brain development and attachment, that it isn't just nice to have my parent around, that primary attachment caregiver, that the responsiveness of that parent attuning to my needs, often pre-verbally, like I don't even have language when I'm little. In fact, when I'm really distressed, I might just be screaming and yelling, I don't know what I need. I need my grown-up. I need my primary attachment caregiver to attune with my needs, move towards my needs, and move me back into regulation by meeting those needs. This is all a right hemispheric to right hemispheric dance. I know you guys don't know this symbol yet, but we're going to do it in a little bit. Right hemispheric to right hemispheric. It's a limbic bond. It's actually the importance of caregivers. So one of the things I like to do here, especially for all my parents that are there, because you may have some of our kids that have had maladaptive attachment patterns, or they've had 3 different disrupted attachment patterns. I'm working with a child right now that's had 4 different mothers. And just because you're the new mother doesn't mean they're not bringing it to you, their whole history, their attachment history of 4 different mothers. So when that child's escalated and pushing you away, like you're just the 4th mother in the long line of, the other mothers they've had. And once that attachment dance floor gets triggered when they're in hyperarousal, that's when the pattern is activated. And I mean activated at an emotional level within the limbic structures of that child's brain. What you do as the parent in those moments either will help you or not help you create security and attachment with the child. This is where this is much more about emotion than it is about our words and what we're saying. That's almost the least important part of it. So I want to give you the fancy term. It's one of my favorite things. You guys hold up your hands again like this. Can you hold up your hands to this thing called attachment? So if you're attaching to the child, and this is where you are, this is the fancy term we give to this, right? You guys see this? This is the fancy term. You are, and if you're in this role with a kid, you're the external psychobiological regulator of your child's internal affective states. What? I thought I was just mom or dad. Like, what? You're the external psychobiological regulator, meaning they can't tell you what they need. They have no clue. In fact, they may be saying, ice cream, ice cream, I want ice cream, I want ice cream. Like they're just screaming what they want. They don't know what they need. And they have little to no ability to tell you what they need. They're drowning in the deep end of the pool. You have to attune, psychobiologically attune to their need states. So when they go into hyperarousal, you're moving towards that distress and helping them regulate back into homeostasis. And I'm going to break all this down because, by the way, once we do this and we're in this dance and we've kind of retrained and repatterned the child, amazing how their behaviors all start to change. So we're going to kind of be going towards why this is so important for us to be knowing what to do when we're here, that there are 2 tasks. And one of those tasks is about moving into our child's emotional bubble and sphere and up pleasuring them through attachment, basically through human connection. So it's why with little ones I might go peekaboo, or rocking and soothing, tickling my child, wrestling with my child, interactive play, lots of touch. So the foundation of attachment is touch and movement with the primary caregiver. So it's the easiest way that we actually attach with our kids is to pull them into us, and we attach through our senses. So your child knows your smell, your child knows your face, your child knows how you move with them. So we attach through our senses to build a limbic bond. This happens very naturally and intuitively when children are born to us, and that child already is looking for the sound of its mother's voice. It's looking for its mother's smell. It knows its mother's smell. So they're already attached through their senses and looking for what's familiar. If you're not getting your child, let's say you're a resource parent and you're not getting your child until they're 5 or they're 6 or they're 7, You have to be more creative about how you're building attachment because you missed some of the foundational pieces around building that security of attachment through the senses. So again, it's where wrestling or interactive play or, jumping on the trampoline together. You have to just get a bit more creative about how you're building that. So again, the two tasks, one, I want to reinforce that you're coming in and up pleasuring their neurobiological system. And when you see I'm pleasured, if I'm your child and you just moved me up into fun pleasure with mommy or daddy or grandpa, whoever my primary caregiver is, that you actually change my neurochemistry. When I'm bathed in pleasure through attachment, I release dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin, where now I'm here. And what I've done is learned that was through attachment, that it was actually human connectedness that gave me this pleasure. This needs to happen 50,000 times, 80,000 times, over and over again, so I don't fear attachment, that attachment is pleasurable. Human connectedness is pleasurable. Some of our children miss these critical stages if they were surrounded in too much toxic stress, if there was domestic violence, if there was fear, if there was physical abuse with the child, too much distress. That neurobiological system, that brain, is not getting enough up pleasure through human connection. They may not be learning a healthy dance of attachment, right? That's why this piece is so important. I never bypass this one, because for parents that are trying to attach to a child of high distress, they struggle relaxing into pleasure of human contact. They may be touch aversive, like don't touch me. They get hyper aroused around touch. If they don't learn to change this dance over time around receiving loving, safe, warm, comfortable touch, they could be impacted over their lifespan and not be able to do close emotional intimacy because they're touch aversive, they're fear-based. So this becomes a really important part of their healing. So two tasks, I want to give you the other one. So this down regulating, what are we down regulating? So we're up stimulating the child into a pleasure state, but then when the child's in a dysregulated state of hyperarousal, it's why you'll never hear Allison say this word called tantrum, because it drives me bananas. I will say no cussing because you're recording this, so it just drives me bananas. That when the child's in a heightened state of dysregulation, we're going to look at the neurophysiological components of that. That's a brain-based stress response. The goal in attachment, remember this attachment? We have to move towards the distress and remove the distress. Because over time, that child learns internal regulation, self-regulation, through initially what we call co-regulation. They need a calm brain to actually help them with their distressed brain. Little ones don't know how to regulate. These are all very complex learned emotional skills connected to physiology and brain development. And I'm going to break that down a little bit more, but I want us to see these two tasks, no matter what the age of the child is, whether they're 2, 4, 5, 8, whether they're teenagers, these attachment tasks stay the same. They may look a little different based on where that child is developmentally, but the parent's role in attachment is the same around these two tasks. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. So the arousal cycle, and I really show this to kind of have us think about that child as being initially, when they're small, a biological being. Like little ones have very immature brain states. It's actually why we as humans have these long childhoods, because we're born with really immature brains. But this brain needs a lot of the right kind of attunement and stimulation. So when that little brain goes into a need state, I want you to imagine the need. And by the way, children never know the need. Like, in fact, asking them why, always always to go like circle and an X. Kids typically don't know why. So when we go, well, why are you crying? Or why are you doing this? Or right, like try to get the why word out of your vocabulary as a parent, because little ones don't have a lot of insight. It's our job to figure out the need, often, by the way, through trial and error. Like, typically, especially if you just get new children, you just got some new kids that landed on your dance floor, you don't know them very well. You don't know their temperament, you don't know their history. Little ones are very unique, as all of us are, but how they've responded to early adversity or what their resilience and strengths might be, that really you're learning often through trial and error. So when they go into a need state, what you'll see, their neurophysiological system, their brain system, because they're biological beings, they go into hyperarousal, meaning their respiratory rate, their heart rate, all of it increases, and now they're in the deep end of the pool. I want you to literally kind of imagine they're like treading water in the deep end of the pool. What they most need from their attachment caregiver is for you to come towards their distress and down regulate it. Down regulate. When you meet the need, that whole biological system calms down. I'm relaxed. My heart rate slows down. My respiratory rate slows down. And it's often because the parent who was regulated has now pulled the child's distress into regulation. It's this co-regulation over and over and over again that slowly gets internalized in healthy, secure attachment. Does that make sense? Now let's go to the disrupted cycle, because what happens with our kids, especially when we move and move and move them thinking, well, they'll just attach over here or attach over there. It's all going to go swimmingly, and it doesn't go swimmingly typically. And especially if our parents or caregivers themselves have too much toxic stress. So especially professionals, I'd have you, as I'm talking about the child right now, think about any of the grown-ups that you're working with, any of the parents that you're working with, that they themselves are in distress. It's often why initially I'm working with parents and not always children. Because if I can't move my parents into in homeostatic state, if my parent's always in hyperarousal, how does a parent co-regulate the child if they themselves are in chronic distress? And right now in our external society, there's a tremendous amount of reactivity and cultural distress connected to the pandemic and social injustice and all kinds of things right now. So if I myself as the parent am in chronic distress, I need my oxygen mask first. Attend to me first, because if I'm not regulated, who's regulating the kid? So it's so important that we not shame our parents, that we not leave them out in the waiting room. I do a ton of attunement with our parents. I want our parents to feel empowered and regulated. They have the tools that they need so they can come towards their child and help their child move into homeostasis. But we're attuning with our parents first. So the lack of attachment. See a difference here, guys? The brain on neglect. And in its most extreme form, I'd have you really, I never like to use the word of just neglect, because I feel like we just tend to minimize the effects of neglect. Extreme neglect, extreme lack of attachment and stimulation. I want you to look at that normal, healthy brain of a 3-year-old. All of that growth in that wonderful brain, through all of that up pleasuring and down regulating through attachment. So again, I want you to see love, we like love, and then see attachment. And why I say attachment's not just this nice thing to have around. Attachment builds a brain. It's so critical for the stimulation and growth of brain development that the lack of attachment, extreme neglect and what am I trying to say? Extreme neglect and impoverishment. The lack of any stimulation, no one holding or rocking or talking to me, or serve and return, no serve and return. That's what we look like. So trauma and brain development, and I just would like to pull in this piece for those of you that are educators and or are parents, especially with kids that are a little bit older, that are struggling academically. Because one of the mistakes that I can see us make as parents and professionals is we get very focused on academics, when our children can't get there because they weren't afforded. Do you see the triangle of typical development? That's really healthy, secure attachment where survival needs are met right away. So the child learns to regulate from the inside out. Then they're learning wonderful social emotional skills when they're 2 and 3 and 4. And then our cognitive executive functioning comes online and you send me to school. But I can regulate, I can attend and focus, I can sit still for the moment. Like my brain is like this. The inverse is what happens with our kids with developmental trauma and attachment disruptions. So when you send that inverted triangle or the actual triangle, the developmental trauma triangle to school, how does that child do in school? They can't attend, they can't focus. They're often chronically triggered by historic trauma. So a child says something mean to me, or I'm triggered, or I can't attend to the teacher and I get all F's anyway and nobody likes me anyway. And so I'm stuck in this pattern now where I may even not be able to learn very well, because learning is optimized when our neurophysiological system is in homeostasis. Where most of you guys right now listening to me, your body is in homeostasis. You have a resting heart rate, you have a resting respiratory rate. So your executive functioning is optimized. You're alert, you can learn, you can retain. That's that wonderful typical development triangle. So your cognitive capabilities maximize. Many of our kids never get there. The nice thing, and we're going to spend more time on it next time, is if we can focus on brain-based bottom-up interventions to help them learn regulation, calmness, self-soothing, maximize resiliency skills, good coping strategies through attachment, we can reverse this. We can help the child get to better regulation, out of survival mode through permanency and secure attachment, healthier social emotional skills where they get serve and return attunement. Then we can maximize executive functioning. But it's where I still feel like we have so much work to do with trauma-informed school settings and really doing more advocacy around our kids' needs in school. And one of the reasons I bring it up here in particular is because when we kind of start hammering away around homework and it's so important, and homework and education and homework with our kids, and they don't have the capacities to retain and to learn, and then we see all these quote behaviors come because they're oppositional and defiant, and I'm not going to do it anyway. We have a different issue going on. It's not that they're on purpose trying to be difficult. They're really not trying to not learn. I shouldn't have used a double negative there, but I think you know what I mean. That really we want to have interventions that really build back in through those 2 tasks in attachment, these competencies and skills, so we can optimize brain development and especially help them get to solid executive functioning, which is not where they're living. If I'm in the deep end of the pool and I'm a kid just surviving and you're going to move me again, or I'm still in foster care and I'm in the deep end of the pool and you send me to school to learn, and I'm swimming, treading water in the deep end of the pool. My other peers that I'm in school with, they're not swimming in the deep end of the pool. They get to just sit there and learn and be happy and go play. I live in the deep end of the pool and you send me to school, and how much do I retain and learn? Now, I'm not saying we don't send them to school, so don't hear that, but I'm just wanting to help us kind of advocate differently for our kids, especially around developmental trauma in the school setting, and not hammer so much at home around homework. So I'm going to now do a link to attachment and child development, and hopefully in a much more specific way, because I've laid a little bit of the groundwork for this, but now I want to do let's really see this link. So one of the things that attachment does, as you've seen, is it helps us to maximize for a child all of these areas of development. And I want you to see, and by the way, you guys have a great handout that I made you that looks like this. Attachment disruptions and toxic stress. And I also gave you one like this. So if those of you that after the training today want to see how you can take the information I'm walking you through and make it really specific to your child, like little Jenny or, you know, little Jose, whoever you're parenting, write their name on here. And you can be writing down and doing this activity based on their needs specifically, because I'm going to be talking generally, but only you know your kid. and where their strengths are and where some of their developmental deficits are. And if they were in foster care any length of time or have multiple attachment disruptions or have abuse or trauma, sexual trauma, whatever that trauma is, they're going to have deficits in any or all of these areas. Okay, so I would like to get very specific about that. So when you look at physiological development, I'd have you think about first, I'm born as a biological being. That physiological development is all about my body and my brain, that we're mammals, that we come into the world as mammals. And one of the first thing I have to learn is how to manage this body and brain, how to regulate, how to feed, how to sleep, how to all of this stuff that sounds like it should just be easy. No, those of you that are parenting our kids of trauma get that. Like, no, their red bucket is often flipped upside down because their body is in often a high state of chronic dysregulation. So their respiratory rate, their heart rate, they're all in distress. They're releasing adrenaline and cortisol, not oxytocin and dopamine. So these are brain-based challenges where this bucket is flipped upside down. They're in distress. Remember, they're up here in distress. The reason that red bucket is red, that biological, that this body, this brain and body is kind of the red bucket, is our physiological development symbol, is because it's the gatekeeper to the other buckets. So I want us to kind of think about this, because once your child is that dysregulated, their social development, their emotional development, their cognitive development, which is where language lives, and conscience development they're all also flipped. They're not accessible. Parenting interventions, and I want to connect this to a parent intervention. Once your child is this dysregulated and you're talking your child to death, how many times have I told you, and why did you do that? Now we talked about this yesterday, and blah, 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 blah. You're doing that, like, yep, like we tend to, and I say that in a playful way, but we do tend to live as adults, especially the older we are, we tend to live pretty cerebrally, generally. We tend to live in our head. We tend to live in our own narrative. So when we see a misbehavior, we tend to talk at it. Like we tend to, just tell it, just don't do that, or why did you do that, or we talked about that yesterday, or just do this, or we start kind of barking like, And I say that because now I want you to look back at the buckets and see the cognitive bucket, which is where language lives and executive functioning, and that your child is not auditorily processing very well. They're not calm, they're not relaxed, they're not in homeostasis. So we want to be moving and changing our interventions to be much more successful based on where that red bucket is, because the red bucket is the gatekeeper. Once we get that red bucket regulated, all of the other buckets, are you ready to solve the problem now? Looks like you're calmer. You need mommy's help to solve the problem? Let's go fix it. Once that red bucket is regulated, I now can access all of the other ones. So all of our interventions when we go into next week, if we don't get how important this first step is, the other interventions don't follow suit. This is why attachment and child development are super important, because these buckets need to be claimed. And when I say claiming, like somebody, at least one amazing person has to show up and claim my development, attach to my buckets, claim my needs. If you just keep moving me from home to home to home and then put me in a group home somewhere, I'm an unclaimed human. Belong nowhere, belong to no one. My needs belong to no one. I'm basically on my own. And then the outlook isn't very pretty for either that child or often for society. So we really want to think about the claiming and how our support as a system, especially child welfare, of the families, the parents that are showing up to claim our children. There's really nothing more important than the families and the parents that are stepping in to claim our kids. And if they don't have the right kinds of support and knowledge, the claiming doesn't go well. We have too many disruptions, and it's not because parents aren't trying. But what if we're just keep doing the same old thing, or it's based on the wrong kind of therapy, or based on I'm just doing what was done to me as a kid? Because all of this is very different, and much of it's not intuitive. So claiming, you'll hear me speak more about claiming. I throw this one in there, you guys. I debated
Allison?
whether, yes.
I just wanted to chime in really quickly because I wanted to just share that in my experience as a former foster parent and with friends who are kinship providers, a lot of times that dysregulated state with children doesn't look violent or tantrumy. Sometimes it's very quiet, and it can manifest as lying about something. That's that defensive behavior, is just sort of lying about something that's obviously untrue. And so I think that's one important thing that I'm trying to translate as you talk about some of these. Sometimes a dysregulated behavior comes across as very calm and doesn't get any attention because it's quiet, but it's still a physiological reaction. Anyway, I'm translating that for myself, and I
Carla,
wanted to share that.
Yes, it's actually, and in fact, I think it's one of the upcoming slides when we talk about the difference between externalizing behaviors and more internalizing behaviors. That is, children kind of get more sophisticated around how to oppose attachment or deflect attachment. And many of our kids lie an awful lot, which is it's a survival skill. How to, in fact, I do a training called What to Do with Challenging Behaviors to really address specifically some of these more, we call them maladaptive behaviors, but they were really survival strategies initially. Doesn't mean we want to ignore them, but there really is kind of a whole way to parent to get to that emotional intimacy and strength and attachment, so children aren't fearing, like the why they lie is really important. Like children typically do lie for a reason, not that they know the reason, but when you trust no one, or waiting for you to give up on me like everybody else, I can lie quite frequently. So no, it's a great point to bring up, Carla. So we have about 10
minutes left.
You gave me a chance to look at the clock, Carla. So I appreciate that.
Good.
And I actually am not as far as long as I wanted to be. So shame on Allison. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but I did want to give you this because this notion, and we hear it a lot, that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. It's just a very fancy way to say the human brain develops kind of post-birth from the bottom up and from the inside out. And this becomes really important because it reminds us and teaches us why year 1, year 2, and year 3 are critically important. And if there were missed milestones, year 1, year 2, and year 3, we actually need to go back to those developmental stages and help the child get to a level of mastery. So think about regulation in particular. So if you have a child that really struggles with chronic dysregulation and hyperarousal, it doesn't serve them well to just stay in that place of never mastering self-regulation. We actually really need to help them get to a place of mastery, or else they're not going to learn very well. Emotional intimacy is difficult. They don't bounce back from stressful events. In fact, you could say it's homework time and they go, homework, and you always make me, and they just like explosions over things that to us feel really minor. So this notion that it's why those initial years are so critically important. And I want to do a piece on the brain in particular. So I want to talk about these 3 different parts of the brain. And you guys have this wonderful handout, so you don't need to write this down, but you have this great, one of my favorite slides. But one of the things I'll have you guys do is hold up your hand. We're going to use a hand model to kind of think about the brain and have some of this, not just with our kids' brains, but our brains when we get distressed. This, from your forearm up to here, that would be your brain stem. And your brain stem, your reptilian brain, the most primitive part of your brain, it's actually handling and managing all of your most primitive kind of parts, so you never have to think about it. So from your heart rate and respiratory rate and endocrine system and hormonal system, like all of these complex systems, you never have to go, oh, blink your eyes, Allison, breathe, Allison. You don't have to tell yourself because your brainstem is online. So it's online when you're sleeping, from the moment, from every second of your day till we die, our brainstem is working for us. So that's brainstem. If you put your thumb in like this, In a minute, we're going to go like this, but put your thumb on top of your brainstem. That's your limbic system. Remember earlier I talked about your right hemisphere? A right hemisphere is in a heightened state of growth the last trimester in utero through the 3rd year of life, meaning that little one is basically going through their day like this, not like this, like this. So they wake up like this, they go to bed like this, so they're more prone to dysregulation, really because their limbic system is immature and it's learning, it's in a growth spurt. And when our brain is in a critical period, what it needs is the right kind of attuned stimulation. Children will typically let you know when it's too much stimulation, like you'll see them go like this, or they shut down, or because it's overwhelming to them. Because how this limbic system is learning is through their senses. So I want you to imagine that that sensory experience, from what they smell to what they see to what they hear. So if my voice sounds like this and warm and loving, versus my voice sounds like this. No, mom's not angry right now. And I only laugh because it's actually good to say, hey, I am pretty angry right now. I am pretty stressed right now. Like to put voice to our tones, or hey, I'm feeling really relaxed and playful right now. Do you want to play a game? Do you hear how the emotion comes through our voice? It's how this part of the brain is learning as it's pulling in and taking in its environment through its senses. So this right hemispheric growth spurt is actually helping build what I call the emotional freeway. And everything that brain is experiencing, remember we say experience is the architect of the brain, is helping to shape that brain. So while that little brain won't cognitively remember, they won't have what we call explicit memory, which you can pull out and cognitively remember. Like if I ask you, what did you have for breakfast today? You go, oh, I had a pancake and an egg. That's a memory you can pull out and cognitively remember. The first 3 years of life, all of it is implicitly encoded, meaning the brain recalls all of it in a sensory-oriented implicit way. It's actually building the structures of the brain, the neuronal pathways and connections. So remember what I said about Bowlby in particular, when Bowlby came into the world with his theory that, you know, he was living in a world where it was like, it doesn't really matter what happens to the child. And what we know now is really the absolute inverse, that those first 3 years, everything's becoming implicitly encoded. So if we expose that child to a tremendous amount of fear and distress and violence and toxicity, the brain will reflect hyper arousal. It's just learning to survive in a world that is stress responsive. Versus if we're really responsive and attuned and comforting and soothing, and we have structure and organization and loving attunement, that brain will reflect that environment. So all of these social emotions have to be learned in, including empathy, and they're helping to build that emotional freeway in the limbic structures. Then what we do, guys, if you put your hand like this, then executive functioning, our thinking brain, sits on top of brainstem and limbic structure. So when we say the brain is generally built bottom up and inside out, these inner core areas are critically important. So harder for many of our kids to access here when they're in chronic hyperarousal. Because by the way, for any of us grown-ups included, us parents, when we're in distress, our brain goes, we're in hyperarousal, meaning our prefrontal cortex, our executive brain, is deprived of oxygen when I'm in a heightened state of distress. So when I'm triggered and I'm distressed, my wonderful wisdom that lives in my prefrontal cortex, remember our IQ, all that wonderful knowledge and wisdom and all those classes that we took, that's here. And where did it go when I'm triggered? It's actually why we might say things we don't mean or say hurtful things we don't mean when we're triggered. So the most important thing is and this will be our kid, if our kid is here, emotions are contagious, which we know. So when our kid is distressed, what's easiest is we become distressed. But what we want to do if that does happen, if we get triggered, we want to take our brain away from our kid in this moment and get our brain regulated again. Because we actually can't help our kid regulate when we're dysregulated. We sound different, we look different. I want you the next time you're really distressed, go run to a mirror and look into the mirror and just see what your face looks like, see what your voice sounds like. And imagine there's a little 2-year-old or 3-year-old or 4-year-old in front of that face, because we're often not in a lot of self-awareness when we're here, because remember, our wisdom and our knowledge and our executive functioning is not online. So the very best thing we can do for our kids is put our oxygen mask on first. So we're not coming from our reptilian, kind of more primitive brain parts. And again, when we're distressed, we basically told the reptile, you better do something to survive here. So we're much more reactive and much more triggered when we're in these more primitive parts of our brain systems. And remember, one of the overarching goals in attachment is to teach our child how to regulate. And by the way, that's a brain-based system. So when our kids hear, our first goal is to help them get here. And we can most effectively do that when we ourselves are regulated. So what happens, oh, I'm bumping up against the clock. Let me finish this last piece, because any of you that want to do homework around this or explore a little bit around adverse childhood experiences, what happens when, and if you look at this picture, I want you to see the brain of the child and the heart, the emotions that live in this body. So the 3 big parts of the child, and that child could be us as a child, that are impacted by stress, toxic stress, abandonment, trauma, rejection, shame, any of these big adverse issues, is my body and my emotions and my brain, my belief systems. So all 3 parts, but they live in this body. So it's often very difficult for us to regulate when some of our pain, if we've had way too much toxic pain and trauma as a child, our pain can come from the inside of our own mind, if we shame ourselves, or inside of our own heart and emotions, if we have unresolved or unaddressed trauma, pain, and suffering. So it's actually where we can grow up and intergenerational trauma works its way through familial systems if left unaddressed. And we now know more about trauma than we've ever known in our history. So it's a great time to be helping our parents kind of understand and explore their own adverse childhood experiences. And I'll close with this, you guys. In the Google Docs, I wrote an article. It's called The Lingering Effects of Childhood Trauma. And there's 2 links in there. There's a link to Nadine Burke-Harris's TED Talk on ACEs, which is great. It's only a 15-minute one, but it'll give you a whole kind of deep dive into ACEs and the lingering effects into adulthood. And then there's another link in there called ACEs Too High, which is a great kind of research-based tool. It's a website where you can go in and find your ACEs score, and that there are only 10 ACEs scores. So you either have a score of 0, 1, 2, or 8, or 10, or whatever you are. And the reason this becomes important, because this is about attachment-related trauma. Remember, attachment is this thing? That our ACEs score, 5 of those are about my attachment caregiving system. Was my mother an alcoholic? Was my father addicted or in prison? When we impact my attachment system as a child, we're adding trauma to every developmental stage of the child. So whether your score is a 2, a 4, or 5 is really important, because we may have implicitly embedded trauma, toxic stress that is unresolved, and that most likely will come out through our parenting, through our emotional triggers. So it's why helping our parents and our caregivers and families, and not just thinking about that what happens in childhood stays in childhood. It builds the brain and becomes implicitly encoded. So us being really aware of our emotional triggers and our ACEs scores is a great tool for us parents. So I have went 2 minutes over, or 1 minute over. So I'm terribly sorry. Thank you so much. And we will pick up from here, I promise. And at the end of this, guys, I'll make sure you all have the PowerPoint. My PowerPoint will keep going as we pick up next time. Okay. Thank you guys so much. It was super fun for me, and I'll look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Thank you, Allison. I'll be sending out an email here in the next few minutes, and you can rewatch this on our YouTube channel early next week. Thank you for all being here. We have enjoyed having you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in a month.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.